My presentation's on bird strikes, but it's on an incident that has occurred from GPX, but also a general review of bird strikes. It will go through what we did initially from the bird strikes, and then this bird strike that occurred in 2016, but then we also have done a lot of works post that bird strike, and because it was a particularly bad year for us, we had two. One was a bird strike that was quite serious, and one was we'll call it a bird tap, whereby it wasn't as serious. One was a helicopter and one was a fixed one. The serious was a fixed wing. So my talk today is about bird strikes, and obviously one of the most famous bird strikes known in recent history is the landing on the Hudson because of the bird strike that occurred to those engines. I thought I'd put this up just as a reminder. It was in Theo's talk or Greg's talk showing where the bird strikes have been a major concern at IAGSA. When we're looking at our statistics, we should be looking at what's happening. The importance of those statistics is what's happening, and the technical committee is doing some fantastic work. But my proposal is we need to do a lot more on bird strikes. Because at present, in IAGSA, in the risk analysis, we have it as a one line, bird strike and mitigation. We have one thing there at the moment, which is a helmet. We're not mitigating the fact of what we're dealing with, and that's what one of our outcomes was. So if we look at across a period of time, this is showing the number of bird strikes gradually increasing in 2016, where ours occurred. Two of those are ours. But you can see a gradual increase from 2013. There seems to be a slight drop in 2017. It may be reflective of the amount of work that's going on, or it may be reflected about where we're flying. It's not unique to Australia. It's not unique to the Americas. It's not unique. The distribution, and there's also a big chunk that we know occurred that hadn't been reported. But the distribution by regions is fairly equal between the Americas, Africa and Australia, Asia Pacific. We've put Asia and the Pacific into that block as well. Again, Europe, but again, if we put that against the amount of flying that's done in Europe, I think that's reflective of what's occurring in that breakdown. So the GPX incident, we were in a place called near Concurry, and for those people not from Australia, Concurry is in this area here, well-known mining area of Mount Isa, just here. Historically, Longreach for the birth of Qantas, just there. Queensland, this is Queensland. We were flying a survey, we had east-west lines. We were flying at a survey height of 50 metres. We were flying at 210. We had one of the most experienced pilots in Australia, being Graham Simpson, and he has flown for other companies as well. He's from Queensland. It's his backyard, no pun intended, it really is his backyard. So we started the flight that particular day at 11:18. The aircraft had returned from 100 hourly, and there was calibrations. They had moved the crystal packs with respect to access for the 100 hourly, and they were doing a recalibration on the radiometrics, so it was a later start than normal. We were starting at 11:18. The plan for the day was to do reflights. So they weren't as long lines as we had anticipated. Prior to the start of the survey, we had done reconnaissance flights. We even had Graham give us a lecture about the birds in the area, because he had flown so much in Queensland. He knew what these birds were. A particular type of bird was a high risk identified in it. They went flying and did reconnaissance flight over known water areas and known dense forest areas in the region. Graham had also talked to the pilots about how the bird flew, this particular bird, which is a kite, which I'll show you a bit later on, but we'd also talked about how it flew and what it does. So he was on a particular line in an easterly direction, close to the western end of the line. He did a scan of the panel just to see where he was at. He looked up again and he saw two kites, medium-sized birds, but I'll show you pictures of what they look like, ahead of the aircraft. And the birds had their wings folded. They were dive bombing him, and he could see that at that point in time. And the birds were too close to initiate any avoidance manoeuvre. He knew, this is a pilot that knew what to do in the case of these birds. So as there was two, one turned and the second bird dived, but ended up making contact with the starboard side of the aircraft in the windscreen and pierced the windscreen. The main body of the bird didn't enter the cockpit, which was good in a way, but went over the top of the aircraft. And one part of the wing, mostly the feathers, entered the cockpit, and the rest came to a bit of splatter on the cabin floor. The pilot was not impacted by the windscreen, and we'll show a picture of what it looked like, and no other aircraft components were damaged. The pilot aborted the survey flight, of course, and initiated a climb and turned to return to Concarry. So he followed procedures, went up high to get away, and then came back to it landed at Concarry at 12:50. Just to see it as a flight path as to where it occurred to make sure there was nothing different to the way he was flying. Flight paths were the red. The red lines here are just it were part of our landowner issues. So they were landowner boundaries, nothing to do with the flight path. The blue line is the survey boundary, and these are his flight lines and turns, and they're short because they were reflights across that period. There's Graham on the left, and there's the windscreen, on the right, and there's the windscreen where the impact occurred. That's a kite. That's the two of them came dive bombing at the plane. And for people that aren't from Queensland or have ever seen a kite, you know, it looks a lovely bird, but this is the type of size that these birds, here's your kite here, here's your eagle, so relatively quite a big bird dive bombing. So at the end of the flight, obviously the aircraft was grounded and the windscreen was replaced and the aircraft inspected. But and we were grounded for a period of time with the client till we had finished our assessment. Well, of course, we had to get a new windscreen in, and so it did take time. So we had time to assess what went on and what we had done and what we could do to mitigate this further. One of the things we hate to do is reinvent the wheel, and we got such an opportunity in this day and age to learn from other groups as to what they've been doing. So we brought together our aviation group, and we've got to thank them as Super Air. Fiona was with us at the time, so we've got to thank Fiona for the work on the safety committee. We brought the pilots and the operators in to talk about what goes on with respect to birds. And one operator put his hand up and said, "Hey, you know when we used to fly in Africa and Namibia, those guys painted their propellers." No one had really looked at why. We were being used in West Air Aviation all through the early 2000s to fly most of Namibia with a big bird population without one bird incident. So we said, well, why would they do that? Why would they why were they painting the propellers? And we found a research done that had just been started to prove the point of the painting the propellers. Did it do anything? There was no definitive answer from West Air, it's just the others were doing it. And there was no study into what was going on. But we found one by the University of Oslo, and they had just started it at that point of time. And they went through an exercise of painting a series of their aircraft to determine whether it made any difference with their bird strike. The problem they were having was they got an awful lot of bird strikes in their country, obviously, but a lot of coastal regions, and they wanted to, again, see same question we were asking, what can we do to mitigate this or to reduce the amount of bird strikes that are occurring? So painting a 210's propeller wasn't a big old deal. So this was what they did. I didn't have a movie of it, but it's the best I could sort of give you the impression of what occurs as it's going around. The sensation of painted it in as what they call a zebra pattern. And this was the early results. So this is after 1 year of their results. That they had 24 aircraft with both before data and after data, and they had a 43% reduction in bird strikes. For each of the 24 aircraft, 16 experienced a reduction in bird strikes after the painting of the propellers, and while 5 did see an increase. But they only had 1 year, like 1 year's set of data at this point in time. They hadn't seen any effect with all 42 were analysed. The operation of the 24 aircraft have not changed since they were included in the project, and they were going to run the project for another 3 or 4 years. End of 2017, they published their results of what came out of. They haven't done a nice presentation yet, but they reported in an aviation paper what their results were. The incidence of a collision between the birds and their prop planes is 1 in 1,000 flights. On planes that the propellers were painted with the zebra stripe, bird strikes happened 0.4 per 1,000 strikes. So their suggestion is by painting it, they reduce their strikes by 50%. Their concept is the fact that they're trying to say that pulsating effect on the stripes scares the birds away. That's their theory. And really all they're working on is the statistics that comes out of it. They haven't tested it with live birds. They haven't thrown the mythical shooting chickens at the windscreens and all that type of thing. Hasn't occurred.